Those have been used both to... Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. I'm excited to continue our conversation with Ann Clements. She's the author of one of the chapters in Secret Covenants, New Insights into Mormon Polygamy, and we're going to be giving away an autographed copy from Ann and others here at gotogospeLtangents.com/contest, and you could win this book right here. In our next conversation, we're going to talk about Mary Clift. She was the most religious of the three Clift sisters that married Theodore Turley, and we'll find out how the different sisters approached polygamy. So you don't want to miss this conversation. Check it out.
Okay, so Mary gets into Nauvoo. She reunites with her family comes later, and then by the end of 1841, she's reunited with her family. She's living in her dad's household at the beginning of 1842. Apparently, she had joined the music choir in Nauvoo, December of 1841, and one of the guys that was the guy that was in charge of the choir, the music teacher, was a guy named Gustavus Hills. And he was kind of a rising star in Nauvoo. He was involved in a whole lot of things. He was this musical, I think it's like lyceum professor or something like that. But he led the choir, basically, right? Most everyone has seen the name Gustavus Hills because he also did the big, huge map of Nauvoo that everyone sees that has the little image of Joseph Smith, and so he helped with that. So apparently, according to Mary's affidavit later on, about mid-January of 1842, Gustavus Hills keeps trying to get Mary to sleep with him. He's a married man. He has kids. But he argues, he's like, no, this is something that the church leaders are doing, that there's going to be a time very shortly when men will be allowed to have more wives than one. And so he eventually is able to convince her. She says just one time they had intercourse, and then she ends up becoming pregnant. And so he initially offers her, based on her affidavits, he initially offers her chemicals, stuff to take as a natural abortive, to abort the baby. She refuses to do that. So then he argues, okay, well, we'll send you down to Adams County. We'll have you go to this little town. You can spend the time down there, and I'll take care of you. But then no one needs to know that you were pregnant and you had this baby, right? She stays in Nauvoo. In September, there is a guy brings up charges against Gustavus Hills. And he argues, and by this time she is big, right? She's going to... she has a baby later in October. But a guy brings up charges against Gustavus Hills, and Mary had sworn an affidavit a few days prior, or a little bit prior to that. But because she didn't physically come to the trial, they had to send people to go get another affidavit. And actually, Gustavus Hills went there too. And so she had to answer questions from all these other guys and from Gustavus Hills himself. And so he's like asking her, like, did I actually, tell you that, that you needed to go to this place? She's like, yeah, you did. And so, and he has some witnesses that will come in, but it's funny because like the way that it's written down in the High Council, the original High Council notes, they're like, yeah, they testified on his behalf, but none of them actually testified that he was innocent of the charges. And then a couple weeks later, a paternity suit. So he's disfellowshipped they decide that he's guilty of the charges. He's disfellowshipped. And then a couple weeks later, Mary's dad files a paternity suit on behalf of Mary against Gustavus Hills. And so Gustavus Hills, there's an agreement that he agrees to financially support this baby. He recognizes that the baby is his, and so he agrees, for the first 3 years, we're going to pay this much, and if I violate this agreement, I have to pay this penalty. So it's very clear, based on the High Council proceedings and the paternity suit, this is Gustavus Hills' child. Like, everyone seems to agree with that. And the baby is born in October of 1842. Unfortunately, it only lives a year.
Oh.
It dies. The baby's named Jason. And it's funny because Jason is not a name that comes up in Gustavus Hills' family, in the Clift family. So I was like, where is this name coming from, right? Because it's very clear when the baby dies, it's Jason L. Clift. It's very clear this is the baby's name. But then, like, I was eventually thinking, I was like, wait, isn't that there the Greek myth of Jason where he totally betrays this woman and she sacrifices her entire family and everything for him and he, like, totally betrays her? I'm like, I wonder if that might have been behind the name. I think Mary felt a little miffed about this. Anyway, so Jason dies October of 1843. He's a
Jason and the Argonauts, is that it?
Jason and the Argonauts, yeah. It's his wife Medea. Medea, yeah, totally like betrays all of her own people in order to help Jason, and then he ends up abandoning her. So that one, total conjecture, but I'm like, I cannot figure out where this name Jason comes from. Because again, like usually you can be like, okay, these family names, oh, that makes sense, whatever. This one doesn't make sense. But then later on, so after her son dies, then we get her most likely marrying Theodore in April of 1844. So again, we come back to these family group sheets, right, that Theodore had put together. Her first baby is named Jason, and there's no last, or it's Jason. Oh, no, that's right. There's no last
Jason
name given.
Clift.
No, there is no Clift. It's Clift on the death record, but on this family group sheet, it's Jason, and then it gives the birth date. And then her next baby, which was born about a year after she married Theodore, most likely plurally, the baby's name is Ephraim, and it gives his birth date. And then sometime later,
Ephraim Turley?
Theoretically, because someone later comes in and writes the name Turley on both of them. So that's why, according to this family group sheet, there's no indication that Jason's father and Ephraim's father would have been different people. There's no indication of that, which is why the family members just assumed this Jason was Theodore's kid. And I think that was a way, in her view, to kind of legitimize this Jason kid. Oh, kind of
like the Selwyn child. Okay.
Yep. So again, like, so she could kind of claim that and give him a worthier father. So to me, that's how I think she approached polygamy. And again, she was the more religious. And so for her, it's like, these are restructuring these kinship networks, right? So Sarah, where she inserts her maiden name into the name, she doesn't want to have a different last name for her sons because that's a prestigious last name. She just wants to insert her maiden name in there. So it's clear these are her boys, right? So she's reconstructing her kinship network in a slightly different way. So anyway, so Mary ends up having several more kids with Theodore. So that's Mary's story. So it totally makes sense why the family thought this was Theodore's kid until you start seeing these high council minutes and until you see the paternity suit. And then you're like, wait a minute, everyone knew this was this other guy's kid. And that's something that Gary Bergera had already figured out years ago. And so the historians were all like, okay, yeah, this January 1842 plural marriage date for Theodore Turley is bunk. Like, it's just obviously not true. But for the family members, that was, as far as they knew, that was the truth.
Right.
So anyway, so that's how figuring out these three stories of these three sisters, but also looking at them, how they approached polygamy differently. Like, because Eliza, I doubt her heart was ever in it. I don't think she was convinced about polygamy. I think she just went through the motions to appease her sisters. Whereas Sarah Ellen Clift, I think she was the one that actually held land in her own maiden name. She was most likely more concerned about financial security, but then she wanted to claim those two sons, including that son that she left in England. Whereas Mary was much more religious. She wanted to change the father of her first son to Theodore because she felt he was a worthier father. So you have these three women. They come from the same family, same socioeconomic background, different approaches to polygamy. And that was the point I wanted to make, is that you have to look at the individuals. You can't just look at these women as a group. You have to look at them individually because individually they have very different perspectives.
This is crazy.
So anyway, but that's why I wanted to really use their words, because we had affidavits from Mary. We had affidavits from Eliza. And it was very clear that their stories were different than what our family had.
Wow. Have you run this by Rick Turley, cousin Rick?
He has a little bit of a different view on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, but he did get a copy of it. But that's my thinking. But he's awesome. He's great to talk to, and I don't know. But he's good about changing his views if he sees the evidence. I don't know that he's really approached it very much, but he's good. He's a great guy.
All right. So takeaways. The myth that Theodore Turley was an early polygamist has been kind of busted. He was an early polygamist.
He was still an early polygamist, but not as early as we thought.
Right. So it was 1844. So Joseph Smith was still alive.
Still before Joseph Smith's death. Yeah.
Okay. So we have documented evidence that he did marry Sarah April 1844, 2 months before Joseph died.
In his own handwriting, yes. He has that exact date. Okay. And then below that on the same page, he has this weird cryptic notation. That might refer to Mary. That I suspect refers to Mary, but that's more conjecture. But it's very clear on the date.
And so had Mary already had this affair with Gustavus?
Yes. So that affair happened in January of 1842. The baby was born October 1842. The baby died October 1843. So by the time she married Theodore, the baby had already been born and died by that point.
Okay. And so all three Clift sisters probably were involved with Theodore due to economic reasons. Is that...
Possibly it could have been economic reasons. Also, because his wife had stopped having kids, that might have been, increasing posterity type thing. So because both of those girls did have a child about a year after Mary and Sarah. They both had children with Theodore about a year after their marriage. Their
1844 marriage.
The 1844 marriages.
Okay. And so the 1845 children were both Theodore's.
As far as we can tell, yep. And they're more, it's funny, Sarah's daughter, the reason why I kind of think it was more financial, her daughter is named Princetta, whereas Mary's is named Ephraim, which is very much more religious and stuff. So it just it's these little details that are wow, just these different mentalities,
Yeah, very good. All right, so as far as you know, are there any other pre-1846 plural marriages in Nauvoo that we're aware of? Or you've just dived into Theodore's
Theodore?
life? For anybody.
Okay, for anybody, well, there's tons.
Okay.
That's what this whole book is about.
Yeah, okay.
And in fact, so mine is about Theodore. The vast majority of the chapters in this book are talking about Joseph Smith and his polygamy. There is a chapter, though, by Devery Anderson, which goes into Willard Richard's, his plural wives, and he has some kind of unique, he has a polyandry situation as well. He has some early marriages that are a little odd. So mine and my chapter and Devery Anderson's chapter both kind of, do a close-up lens on a specific guy with his wives, whereas most of the others, they're more focused on Joseph Smith.
I confess I knew that you were local and Claire was local, and I read your two chapters first. And then I wanted to read Mark's because hopefully I'll see Mark in September.
Mark's is cool because he actually gathers up, and he has this really neat table.
I know. That is a great table.
Yes. So it's a great table that really goes into more contemporary evidence.
Yeah. I was kind of surprised that both Mark and Claire kind of glossed over the Fanny Alger story. But I think Don Bradley...
Bradley goes into
Okay, I haven't read Don's chapter
that.
yet. So
Don Bradley goes on detail as far as the timing of it.
Okay, so that's probably why.
But then apparently there was a spin-off. If you listen to Christopher Smith...
who also wrote with Don.
Who also wrote a chapter, but then they wrote a chapter together.
Yeah.
Because there was this idea, and it's a really cool idea that initially the Fanny Alger stuff may have been more of an adoption sealing that morphed into a marriage sealing. as opposed to a straight up original marriage
Oh,
sealing.
I need to read
They
that
have
one.
this really cool, and it was kind of from what Chris said on a podcast interview, he was like, it was kind of a throwaway idea, but then they decided to start developing it. So it's a really fascinating chapter. I think it actually there's some, it's worth considering. It's worth
I
considering.
hate to promote other podcasts, but what was that one on? Was it Whitmer?
I can't remember which one it was.
'Cause
And
he's
it
been on
might be
Whitmer
the
a few
one
times.
from Signature Books that's still coming out, the episode that hasn't
Oh.
quite come out yet. 'Cause it might have been the one that we were all discussing together.
Okay.
So, but it is really fascinating. And that's the thing. I guess when Cheryl was first approached by Signature Books, the idea was that she would gather existing articles and put them together in this book, this compilation. So it would, but she was like, no, we need new stuff. And so that's something in this book, is that each of the things is new, represents newer research. Some of the items, like DeVries, he had written about Willard Richards before, so some of that stuff is kind of recycled from
Just
the
updated.
Sunstone. And is it Bill Smith?
Yeah, Bill.
Bill Smith, he's written an entire book on Section 132.
Yeah.
And so obviously a lot of his ideas are coming from that, but it's still his is the very last chapter in the book. And it talks about just how Section 132 has still impacted the church through the years. And even with the family proclamation.
Bill's local too. I didn't think about that. I need to get him on.
There's a lot of great stuff in here. It's the new
Yeah.
stuff.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Mary Ann Clements. She's one of the authors in Secret Covenants, New Insights into Early Mormon Polygamy. In our next conversation, we're going to move on to some of the polygamy skeptics, but it's only available on newsletter subscribers. So go to gospeltangents.com/newsletter, and you can hear the final part of our conversation with Mary Ann Clements. We're going to talk about land deeds and 132.
Yeah, so in my mind, I agree with Don Bradley. This is actually validation of William Clayton's journal, but other people see it as clearly William Clayton was lying because there were two transactions, one on the 12th, one on the 15th, and they don't think that historians are responsible because they keep conflating the two.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.